My name is Terry Alford, and welcome to Our Story. It's very exciting to know that for so many of you, as you unwind from your long days and prepare for your dinners, that you've invited us into your homes tonight to learn a little more about what's happening in the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor, and for that matter, on the east side of Buffalo in its entirety. So as you already know, Our Story is just one more forum to keep you all informed. Again, Our Story will air at this time every Thursday evening right here on Waffle Radio Power 96.5 FM. Our Story will feature guests, unknown facts, treasure stories, themes that provide insight into the historic Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor and the east side of Buffalo. So join us every Thursday evening and learn more about the latest happenings of our Heritage Corridor and meet the proud and resilient men and women living or conducting business within and around our neighborhoods on the east side of Buffalo. So it's with great pride, and great anticipation that I introduce our guest tonight, who's, for many of you, especially in the historic world, know and love so well. That's Dr. Lillian Williams. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
It's good to see you.
It's a pleasure.
Dr. Williams is the Director of Community Engagement and Associate Professor of the Department of Africana and American Studies here at the University of Buffalo. She's also a long-term board member of our Heritage Corridor Commission and is serving as its Preservation Committee Chair. So, Dr. Williams, as we always do with our guests, we always invite them to share with the audience that's listening in, briefly a little bit about your story.
My story. It's interesting. Where do I begin? Essentially, I came to Western New York, Niagara Falls, to be specific, with my parents at age 4. And we lived on the north side of Niagara Falls. And it was a thriving community. My father had come, he was a skilled worker, to seek employment in the industries here, and did. But it was, in many ways, it was like my home in Mississippi. In Mississippi, we lived just on the outskirts of Vicksburg. I was born in Vicksburg, Mississippi. We lived on the outskirts. My great-great-grandfathers on both sides of my family had purchased land, and they distributed that land to their children. So I lived in a community of relatives, and that was an important aspect of my life. It was joyful. Even after we moved to Niagara Falls, we returned home, quote unquote, my parents' home, and had reunions with cousins and aunts and uncles, and that was our life. When we came to Niagara Falls, it was sort of like that too. In fact, one of my uncles had come to Niagara Falls, had purchased a home. He and his family lived on the first floor front. My family lived on the back, first floor back. And a third cousin lived upstairs. So it was in many ways like Mississippi for me. I was living with my cousins, and we just enjoyed our community, working on the playground, which was across the street from our house, working with various organizations like the community center. My parents were very active in the community, the NAACP, Parent Teachers Association. We were members of the New Hope Baptist Church, where Horace Whitaker was the minister, and he had gone to theology school with Martin Luther King at Crozier Institute. So King came to our church. That was the environment in which I grew up.
Yeah, that's something. It's like, your story is unlike a lot of stories in Buffalo in those days of people traveling by train, coming to cities like Buffalo for opportunities, and then being, in many cases, met here by extended families, taken in and cultivated and nurtured. So that's a great story, Doctor.
In fact, the chain migration is important, as you said. One relative would come and tell relatives who are still in the South about the conditions that they experience. And you mentioned the train, too, and I smiled because we came, my parents had come before, but my mom and father had left my two brothers and me with our grandparents
Right.
in Mississippi. Mom came back to get my brothers and me. Our father met us in Chicago. So we took, my
Okay.
mom and my two brothers and I came by train to Chicago. Dad met us there. And I remember arriving in Buffalo at the train station and seeing this huge buffalo.
Right.
Of course, I'm 4 years old and from Mississippi. I'd never seen a buffalo before. But it was fascinating to see that. And
Right.
also the beautiful train station. I still remember. Dad had said we were going to have breakfast when we arrived, so I saw this beautiful restaurant with lovely white tablecloths, and I ran to the restaurant.
Right.
Oh, and my father was chasing me. There was a maitre d' there at that point. I didn't know that they didn't serve black people.
Oh, let's see.
So we were going to eat, but not there.
Right. That's interesting because, with the steady improvement, transformation of the Heritage Corridor into as a destination, and you see all the great things that's planned for Central Terminal at the same time in real time, the investment that's being made, to really bring these icons back, and that's iconic on the east side of Buffalo, hopefully to reimagine and reinvigorate, the economies that typically surrounded these iconic places.
I've seen those plans, and I'm
Right.
eager to see them actually implemented.
Yes, I'm eager too. So why did you want to become a historian?
The story goes back probably to that age 4. My father was a history buff. He read widely. He subscribed to newspapers like the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and everything that my father read, I read.
Yeah, okay.
So in first grade, we read a primer called Dick and Jane. That was a basic primer, I guess, that so many were using at that time. And I seriously thought that they had some issues, psychological issues,
Right.
educational reform needed for them. But one day I asked my teacher, my first grade teacher, what was wrong with Dick and Jane? And she asked me why. I said, they said, oh, look, see, nobody talks like that. What's wrong with them? She said, you don't like that? I said, no. She said, you can bring books to school and share them with the class. So I did. And I went home. My father gave me a book, 100 little-known facts about the Negro, J.A. Rogers. I found this book fascinating because it talked about scientists and kings and queens, and it gave me an interesting perspective on the world that I had not been introduced to previously introduced to. So I thought the students in my class would be interested in that as well. I brought it to school, gave it to the teacher. Her response was not welcoming at all. In fact, she told me that my father's books were a pack of lies. I should not bring them to school again because Africans had not contributed anything to civilization. They were just slaves. And the clincher for me, she said, Africa was the dark continent. At that point, I was almost in tears because I thought the sun didn't shine in Africa.
Right.
But that set me, I think, on a path to learn more about Africa, to learn more about African American history. And I continued to do that when I graduated from college. I taught social studies at Southside Junior High School in Buffalo. I implemented a program that focused upon African American history. And then ultimately, I decided to return to college to pursue a doctorate in history. And that was motivated in part because I attended a conference at UB where C.L.R. James was there.
Okay.
Sinclair Drake.
Okay.
All of these prominent scholars were at the University of Buffalo. I had read about their coming in the Buffalo News, and I said, I have to be there. So I went. And basically 3 weeks later, I was applying to graduate school. And I wanted to work on African American history, and specifically Buffalo, but I was told that there were no sources available to do that. So that set me on another path as well.
Right.
And that was to create archives to document the history and culture of African Americans in Buffalo.
So it's always encouraging to hear that despite, someone saying that we're not worthy to be talked about, or our histories and heritage is not worthy to be celebrated, that serves as inspiration to circumvent, to overcome, to go around, and still be successful, would you say? So, I know you've taught, it's these type of things that you instilled in your students?
Absolutely. Students in my classes have to go to archives. They have to use primary sources because I want them to read, to analyze, and to reach their own conclusions based upon the availability of sources. Now, initially, there were few sources for me to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, but I knew it was possible. Two things. I'll say one thing and then come back to the sources in a minute. But when I was in undergraduate school, I was fortunate to work as a research assistant for Herbert Gutman.
Okay.
At that time, Herbert Gutman was doing a study of African American families in slavery. And it was influenced in part by the works that had been published by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, which spoke to the debilitating impact of family life among blacks. And I knew that there was another story. Gutman knew there was another story. A couple of my colleagues, Dr. Monroe Fordham, the late Dr. Monroe Fordham, Shirley Harrington, Dr. Shirley Harrington, and Frank Messiah. And we founded the Afro-American Historical Association of the Niagara Frontier. We began by basically collecting documents. Ralph Watkins had found an African-American newspaper that was extant for a few years. We've made arrangements for it to be microfilmed and accessible. Fordham found the Economic Cooperative Society's papers, which was a self-help organization that was founded in 1931, I believe, and lasted until 1962.
Right.
But it helped economic development among black people. It was a self-help agency. And I found the papers of the Michigan Avenue YMCA.
Oh, that's exciting.
So we made arrangements for these papers to be microfilmed and to be placed in repositories.
Is the association still going?
The association is still going. In fact, this year it celebrates its 50th anniversary.
Wow. How can one join? I'm going to get ahead of myself, but how does one participate in the association?
It's membership based.
Membership based, okay.
Yes.
That's what, before you leave, we're going to get that information out to the
Absolutely.
audience. That's great. So you are not just an accomplished historian, you're also an accomplished writer. And one of your great works, I think is one of your great works, if I read it, is Strangers in the Land of Paradise, the creation of an African-American community, Buffalo, New York, 1900 through 1940. Could you maybe share, with the audience, the significance of that work? I consider a masterpiece, actually.
Thank you. When I began to look at blacks in cities, I wanted to focus upon Buffalo primarily, but when I looked at studies that had been done at the time, most of them had titles such as The Creation of a Ghetto, The Making of a Ghetto, which essentially focused upon race relations and focused upon pathology within those communities. Now, I told you earlier about my growing up in Niagara Falls, and I knew I grew up in community. I did not grow up in chaos.
Right.
So I knew that there was another story to be told. So with Strangers in the Land of Paradise, that's the story that I wanted to tell, and it's called The Creation of an African American Community. And no, community, not ghetto or making of a ghetto. So I was able to talk about what do blacks do despite racism that they experience. And I contend they created communities. They created institutions like the Michigan Avenue YMCA. They had Masonic orders that focus upon building a community, educating, promoting, supporting those communities, whether we're talking about health, education, or other activities. That's what black people did.
Right.
And Strangers highlights that. And it also shows that, the myth of that pathological family, too, was, and I saw the extended family not as something that was negative, but as something that was supportive of those communities.
Right, right. I think it's a great work. I think if anyone hasn't read this, I would strongly suggest you go get it. You go find it. If you want to find out how to get it, you can contact our office. We let you know where to get it. So I would always encourage people to read works like this. It's very more than just informative. It's truly inspirational, I think. So when we talk about the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor, we talk about a number of different histories and iconic figures that's represented and emblematic of the greatness of this corridor, the greatness of the progress of African American experience in the city of Buffalo and the Buffalo Niagara region for that matter. One of my favorite iconic figures is Mary Burnett Talbert. And Dr. Williams is, if she's not the preeminent expert, I don't know who is in this country. Doctor, you want maybe share with the listening audience who Mary Talbert was and why she is so great?
How much time do I have?
I know we need a few shows, I admit.
I learned about Mary Talbot. In fact, I learned about her primarily because after I had gotten my doctorate, I was invited to give a paper at a women's history conference.
Okay.
And I was so excited about getting the invitation, I accepted it, but I hadn't done any work on women's history.
Okay.
But I remember when I was working on my Buffalo study that I found wherever I looked, I saw Mary Talbot. So I said, okay, I'll do this paper. It's only 10 pages. It shouldn't be that challenging. And I went back to do the research on Talbot and found that I didn't really have a lot of research. I knew a lot of singular facts about her.
Right.
But that set me on my path. Who is this woman and why is she ever present? It didn't matter if I was looking at Labor Department records, if I was looking at institutional records like the Y or Eastern Stars or other institutions within the African American community, there was Mary Talbot. She even was involved with various presidential administrations. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to learn more about her. So that set me on a decades-long journey of trying to recapture her life and to share that. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you some things about her.
Please.
She was an educator. She graduated from Oberlin College at age 19 and moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, where she became a teacher, later a principal, a vice principal, and a principal, the only woman in the state of Arkansas that had acceded to that position. She also became very active in the women's club movement, the African American women's club movement. And in 1896, black women came together and they founded the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs that focused upon suffrage, focused upon education, crime that was perpetrated against African Americans, etc. Talbot became president of that organization. She was also president of a local organization, the Phyllis Wheatley Club, which became affiliated with the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. As president and member of that organization, she and her colleagues protested the negative images of African Americans that had been displayed at the Pan American Exposition in 1901. Right. They founded the local branch of the Buffalo NAACP. Later on, Talbot became a vice president of the national NAACP and led its national anti-lynching campaign.
Okay.
She traveled to France where she worked with black troops during World War I, providing educational opportunities for them. And they sent her home with $1,000 to help support the Frederick Douglass estate, which was purchased and preserved under the auspices of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Right. When Talbot was president.
Mm-hmm. So I know most people know that Mary Talbot, home was right next to the Michigan Street Baptist Church at the time, and it was at her home where a great event occurred. You want to maybe share a little bit about
Sure.
that?
as a matter of fact, Mary Talbert, I mean, the black elite, the black intelligentsia,
Uh-huh.
were in touch with each other through conventions, through traveling to various resorts. There were African American resorts that they met at. But at any rate, the Talbert family was quite prominent. And one of their colleagues was W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right.
Another was Booker T. Washington,
yes.
which is interesting in itself.
It's an interesting dynamic.
But at any rate, Du Bois contacted William Talbert and asked him to host a meeting of 27 persons to talk about how to address the conditions of black people in the 20th century. That was the Niagara movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was at the Talbert's home, as a matter of fact, where the principles of the Niagara movement were drawn up. Women, however, at that time were not members of that organization, nor could they be. Du Bois had to work out some things with William Monroe Trotter
Yes.
before they could reach that decision where women could become members. But at any rate, the principles were drawn up in Buffalo at the Talbert home, and they then continued their proceedings in Fort Erie, Ontario.
Mm-hmm. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. So before going, let's give a little blurb about what's happening over in our corridor. No, March is observed as Women's History Month. So for the entire month, the Heritage Corridor will be presenting a special exhibit in tribute to our mothers, aunts, and grandmothers called Stitching Stories, featuring quilts by Daisy Estelle Anderson and others. The exhibit will run from Mondays through Fridays, beginning March 7th right through the 29th, 9 a.m. right until 5 p.m. at the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission's headquarters, which is located at 136 Broadway, right across the street from the Colored Musicians Club and Waffle Radio Studios. So for more information, visit us online at www.michiganstreetbuffalo.org or call our offices at 716-322-1002. So I know we're getting close to being finished with today's show, but before we finish today, this woman here in front of me, Dr. Lillian Williams, was very instrumental and continues to be very instrumental in getting the Mary Talbot story out there, amongst other women's stories, historic figures that are women. That's incredible. That's very important, especially as we celebrate Women's History Month. Could you maybe talk about some of the things that you're planning for the rest of the year as it applies to Mary Talbot or the history of women?
Thank you for that question. The trailblazing women of Erie County, on whose steering committee I serve, has made arrangements to have a statue of Mary Talbot placed on the old courthouse lawn on Franklin Street in downtown Buffalo. And the other is Sitab Green, who was a Venezuelan activist.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also another marker that's going to be placed at the final home where Talbot lived in Buffalo, and that's on Northland Avenue, and that should be taking place sometime this spring. But the statue downtown, I forgot to mention, will be installed next week, and next month, and the artist is Vinnie Bagwell, a prominent sculptor. So stay tuned.
That's great. And last summer, you were instrumental in dedicating a place marker for a prominent African American woman in Niagara Falls.
That's right,
Right.
Charlotte Dett.
Mm-hmm. So who was Charlotte Dett?
Charlotte Dett also was an associate of Mary Talbot,
Okay.
active in the women's club movement, founder of the Niagara Community Center, and she owned a 17-room guest house in downtown Niagara Falls.
Oh, that's something.
So where the marker is where her near the site of her home.
Mm-hmm.
Her home no longer exists.
Mm-hmm. So, and last year during Women's History Month, I participated in a great event to honor Mary Talbot, and I believe the city and the county actually designated that day as Mary Talbot Day. I think I remember seeing that. Dr. Williams, for those who can't see, just gave me some eyes, so I better clarify that before I say that. But I know we had a great day that day when we honored and recognized Mary Talbert over at the Buffalo History Museum.
Absolutely.
Right. And it was great to see living relatives that participated as well as students from some of the high schools who were there to honor and recognize Mary Talbert as well. It's a great day. So Dr. Williams is doing great things. And, of course, 30 minutes is pales in a time that we need to talk about all the things that you're doing, Dr. Williams, all the history that you're associated with and telling the story of Mary Talbert and so many other women. So you got to come back. We got to have you back at another time.
Thank you so
Promise
much.
that? I'm going to get you to promise on the air.
I would enjoy that.
Fantastic. So that's the end of the show. We'd like to again thank Dr. Lillian Williams for being our guest tonight. If you would like to learn more about the Heritage Corridor or about what Dr. Williams is doing, you can always look us up at our website, www.michiganstreetbuffalo.org, or call our office at 716-322-1002. I should also encourage the audience for the shows that you may have missed, or if you want to see the show or listen to the show again, you can always go to that website. We are streaming and recording these shows as well. So for those who missed any show or any information, you can always come back and get a recap. So again, that's the end of our night. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.